The sun was low on the horizon, turning the sky into fire and smoke. In the middle of the fields stood a massive machine, its steel blades spinning, cutting, and tearing through the tall crops like hungry jaws. The ground shook with its weight, and the air smelled of oil and dust. Near the machine, a small figure stood alone. She was not human. Her skin carried a faint glow of pale silver, her eyes wide, dark, and filled with fear. Her thin arms clutched her chest, trembling as the machine crawled closer. She was only a child, left to die by the very people who should have protected her. Her family had walked away minutes ago, their long cloaks dragging in the dirt as they refused to look back. Not a word, not a sign of love, only cold silence. They abandoned her in front of the blades, as if she were nothing more than useless trash. The child whispered something in her language, a broken sound that carried pain. Her voice was lost under the grinding roar of the harvester. She pressed her hands to her ears, her small body shaking. The world felt heavy, and she felt smaller than ever before. The humans working in the field noticed her, but they turned away. They had seen these aliens before. They were told never to get involved, never to risk their lives for outsiders. So they lowered their heads and kept walking. It was easier to ignore than to feel pity. But not everyone ignored. Far in the distance, a man noticed her. He was tall, strong from years of hard labor, his clothes marked by sweat and dust. He stopped, his breath caught in his chest. He saw the girl's small body in the path of the machine, and something inside him refused to let it happen. The harvester was slow but unstoppable. Its massive wheels pressed deep into the soil, blades cutting endlessly. The sound echoed like thunder, each second bringing it closer to the child. She stepped back once, then froze. Her legs refused to move. Fear locked her in place. The man clenched his fists. He looked around, but no one else cared. Every worker kept their eyes down, pretending not to see. He muttered under his breath, angry at their silence. And then he started running. The distance between him and the child felt endless. The ground was uneven, the dust thick in the air. The machine's roar grew louder with every heartbeat. The girl's glowing eyes found him. For the first time, she felt someone was looking at her, not as a burden, but as someone worth saving. Her chest rose and fell in sharp breaths. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The harvester's shadow fell over her, long and dark. The blades spun like hungry teeth, only a few steps away now. The man's legs burned as he pushed forward. Every muscle in his body demanded he stop, but his heart told him no. He thought of nothing else. Only her, the child who had been left to die, abandoned by her own blood. He shouted, his voice cutting through the machine's roar. The girl's head turned toward him. Her fear met his determination. In that single moment, she understood. This human would not leave her. Not like the others. Closer and closer he came. The machine loomed above them both, a monster made of metal and fire. Dust flew around its wheels, choking the air. The man's boots pounded the ground, each step echoing like a promise. The girl's knees gave way, and she fell onto the dirt. The harvester's blades were almost upon her. The man's heart hammered. He leapt forward, his arms reaching out. The world slowed as his shadow fell over the girl, and with every ounce of strength, he grabbed her. He pulled her small body against his chest and rolled away from the path of the blades. The harvester screamed past. The earth trembled, and dust swallowed them both. The girl's breath came in ragged gasps as she clung to him. The man held her tight, shielding her from the storm of dirt and sound. When the noise faded, silence spread across the field. The harvester moved on, uncaring, its job endless. But the girl was alive, and in the arms of the human, she felt, for the first time, not abandoned but saved. The harvester's roar faded into the distance, leaving the field in heavy silence. Dust hung in the air like a pale curtain, stinging eyes and filling lungs. The human worker, his chest heaving, still held the trembling alien child against him. Her small frame shook with every breath, her glowing eyes wide and filled with terror. For a long moment, he did not move. His hands pressed her close, his body tense, as if expecting the machine to return. But when it did not, he exhaled slowly, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. The child whimpered, her hands clutching at his shirt as though she feared he would vanish too. Her touch was light, weak, yet desperate, and that desperate grip settled his decision. Around them, the other workers had stopped. They had seen him run into danger, seen him drag the alien child away from the blades. But their faces showed no pride, no thanks, only unease. Whispers moved like wind through the crowd. Foolish human, some muttered, risking life for one of them. Others turned away, afraid to be associated with him. He ignored them. His eyes stayed on the girl. Her silver skin gleamed faintly under the sun, streaked with dirt, her breath sharp and shallow. She was alive because of him, and that truth burned in his chest like fire. The decision formed inside him, solid and unshakable. He would not walk away, not like her family had, not like the other humans now doing their best to pretend nothing had happened. He had chosen her, whether he wanted to or not. The child tried to speak, her words broken, her alien tongue strange to his ears. But her meaning was clear enough. Her eyes begged a question. Will you leave me too? He shook his head slowly, firmly. No, he whispered, his voice steady despite the storm in his heart. I will not leave you. The workers shifted nervously. One of them stepped forward, an older man with hard eyes and rough hands. You should put her back, the man said coldly. She's not ours, she's not worth it. The human who had saved her clenched his jaw. His hands tightened around the child, and his voice came out low but strong. She is a life, and that is enough. The older man spat into the dust, muttering, a life that was thrown away by her own kind. Don't make her your burden. But the rescuer did not move. His heart had already decided. The girl's small hands still clung to him, and in her touch he felt trust, fragile but real. It was a trust he would not betray. He looked at the horizon, where the alien family had vanished minutes ago. Their cloaks still haunted the edge of his vision, like shadows walking away forever. They had chosen to abandon her, but he had chosen differently, and in that choice, he felt more human than ever. The girl stirred, her head resting against his chest. Her voice came again, weak and trembling. He could not understand the words, but he understood the tone. It was the tone of someone asking for safety. It was the voice of someone who had never been given a chance. He bent his head closer and whispered, You are safe now, I promise. The crowd dispersed slowly. Some shook their heads, others muttered about trouble, but no one dared come closer. The man stood alone with the alien child in his arms. Alone but unbroken. Every part of his body knew the danger. To protect her meant standing against not only her people, but perhaps his own. To carry her meant carrying risk, judgment, and maybe even punishment. But his heart had made the choice already. He could no more abandon her than he could stop breathing. He shifted her gently in his arms, feeling how light she was, like a bird fallen from its nest. Her eyes fluttered closed, exhaustion pulling her down. But even as she drifted into uneasy sleep, her hands refused to let go of him. That small grip was the chain of his promise, and he accepted it without hesitation. The sun sank lower, shadows stretching across the field. The harvester's hum was far away now, replaced by the softer sounds of the evening. The man turned, carrying her toward the edge of the fields. Every step he took pressed his decision deeper into the soil. Every step declared silently, She is mine to protect now. And though he could not know it yet, this single decision would change more than just one life. It would change the way humans and aliens looked at each other. It would test the meaning of loyalty, compassion, and courage. And it all began with one choice, his choice to stand between her and the blades. Night began to settle over the wide fields. The sun had slipped low, leaving streaks of red and gold across the sky. The harvester machines still moved in the distance, their blades flashing like teeth under the fading light. The ground shivered each time the heavy wheels crushed the soil, echoing like thunder beneath the earth. The man walked slowly, the alien child still in his arms. She was weak, her silver skin pale in the dim glow, her body trembling from shock. Every step he took carried weight, not from her body, but from the choice he had made. He had pulled her away from death, but now he knew danger was not gone. Behind him, whispers still followed. Other workers had seen his defiance, and their faces had shown both fear and anger. Some thought him foolish, others thought him reckless. And still, he could feel their eyes on his back, heavy like stones. The girl stirred, her eyes opening halfway. The faint glow in them flickered like a dying flame. She whispered something in her language, soft and broken. The man did not understand, but the plea in her voice was clear. She feared the blades still. Even in safety, the memory of being left to die clung to her like shadow. He paused, kneeling down to place her gently on the ground. She tried to stand, but her legs were too weak, collapsing beneath her weight. The man reached to steady her, his strong hands holding her arms as if to anchor her to the earth. Her gaze lifted to his, filled with a question she could not speak. Would he stay? Would he protect her again? Before he could answer, the growl of another harvester echoed closer. This one was not far. It was coming their way. Its blade spun with deadly hunger, tearing through rows of tall crops. The sound was louder now, the air vibrating with its approach. The girl gasped, clutching the man's arm with sudden strength born of terror. He turned, his eyes narrowing. The massive machine crawled toward them, each second stealing the ground between. Its lights glared through the haze of dust, white and blinding. The man knew what it meant. If they stayed here, they would be crushed. There was no time to think, no time to wait, only time to act. Come, he whispered, lifting her once more. But she resisted, her voice sharp and frightened. She pointed not at herself, but at something else, the ground, the shadows, the machine. The man looked closer, and his breath caught. Another small figure lay hidden just ahead, half buried in dust and dirt. Another child, even weaker, left behind like her. For a heartbeat, he froze. One child in his arms, another helpless in the path of the blades. His mind raced, his chest burned. The machine roared louder, its blades cutting closer with every breath. He could not carry both, not at once. But he could not leave one behind either. He set the girl gently against a fallen beam. Stay, he whispered firmly, his voice steady though fear tore through him. Her glowing eyes widened, but she nodded, trusting him. Then he turned and sprinted toward the second child. The harvester screamed. Its wheels churned the soil, throwing clumps into the air. Its blade spun like a storm. The man's boots pounded the ground, his breath harsh in his throat. The second child was small, frail, his skin dim and cold. The man dropped to his knees, dragging the child up into his arms. The machine loomed, towering over them. Its metal body filled the sky, its shadow swallowing the ground. The man ran, clutching the limp child against his chest. The blade screamed closer, tearing the air with deadly rhythm. The dust burned his eyes, but he did not stop. Each step was a battle, each breath a war. The girl watched, her hands gripping the beam, her voice breaking as she cried out to him. Her scream was swallowed by the machine's roar, but he heard it. It gave him strength, fire in his veins. He pushed harder, his muscles screaming, his body refusing to give in. At the last second, he leapt sideways, rolling across the dirt. The machine thundered past, its blades missing by inches. The ground shook, dust exploded around them. But the children were safe. The man held both close, gasping, his body shaking with exhaustion. Silence returned slowly. The harvester moved on, blind to what it had nearly destroyed. The field lay torn, the air thick, but life remained. The girl crawled forward, her eyes wet, her small hand reaching for his. When her fingers touched his, he felt her trust deepen, stronger than before. Now, there were 2 lives in his care, 2 fragile sparks that had been left for the blades. And he knew the truth with absolute clarity. He would not abandon them. Not now, not ever. Even if the whole world turned against him. Even if more machines came. He had chosen his path, and nothing could make him turn back. The fields grew quiet after the machine rolled away. Only the echo of its heavy wheels remained, fading into the distance. The dust slowly settled, revealing the torn earth and the broken stalks of crops. But in the middle of the ruin, 3 figures sat breathing in ragged unison. The human leaned back against a low ridge of dirt. His chest rose and fell like a drum, sweat dripping down his face. In one arm, he held the weak alien boy, limp but alive. Beside him, the silver-skinned girl crawled close, pressing herself against his side. Her small hand trembled as she gripped his sleeve, refusing to let go. For a long time, none of them spoke. The silence was heavy, but not empty. It was filled with the sound of survival. The girl's glowing eyes looked at him, filled with awe and confusion. She had never seen such defiance, such risk taken for someone like her. Her kind had always believed humans were selfish, unworthy of trust. But here was proof, carved into the earth, that at least one human thought differently. The boy stirred, coughing weakly. The human lowered him carefully, brushing dirt from his skin. He looked frail, starved of strength, abandoned like the girl had been. His chest rose in shallow breaths, but he was alive. Alive because the human had chosen to risk his life not once, but twice. The girl tried to speak, her words broken and halting. Her language carried sharp sounds and soft whispers, hard to understand. But her eyes told more than her tongue could. They shone with gratitude, fragile and bright. She leaned against the man's arm and closed her eyes, whispering something that sounded like a promise. The man stayed still, his mind racing. What had begun as a simple choice in a single moment had grown heavier. Now, he was not responsible for one child, but 2. Both abandoned, both cast aside as worthless, and both now looking to him as if he were their only shield. He thought of the other workers, the ones who had turned away. None of them would help. None would share this burden. They would only whisper in fear or anger. They would call him foolish, reckless, even traitor. But he felt no regret. The weight in his arms was not a burden. It was purpose. The night grew colder, a sharp wind sweeping across the open fields. The crops swayed, broken in some places, standing tall in others. The machines were still out there, moving like giants through the darkness. But for now, the 3 of them had a small pocket of peace. The boy shifted, opening his eyes. They glowed faintly, weaker than the girl's, but still carrying the same strange light. He looked up at the man holding him, confusion playing on his face. He whispered something, perhaps his name, perhaps a question. The human shook his head gently. "I don't understand you," he said softly, "but I won't leave you." The children exchanged a look. For the first time since their abandonment, they seemed to breathe easier. Together, they leaned against him, their fragile bodies warming against his. And in that closeness, he felt their trust binding him tighter than any chain. Far away, at the edge of the field, shadows moved. Figures cloaked in dark fabric stood watching. Their eyes glinted under the dim light, sharp and cruel. They had returned, not to save, but to make sure their castaways were gone. They saw the human now, saw him protecting what they had abandoned, and their whispers carried across the wind like venom. The man noticed them, his eyes narrowing. He knew they would not be pleased with his defiance. But he did not flinch, did not shift his arms away from the children. Instead, he straightened his back, his shoulders hard with resolve. If they meant to take the children again, they would have to face him. The girl sensed it too, her eyes snapping open. She pressed closer to him, whispering in fear. The boy reached a small hand to grip the man's shirt. Their trust had grown into something deeper, dependence. They no longer looked to the distance for safety. They looked only to the human, the one who had chosen them. The night grew darker, the wind colder. But in the middle of the ruined field, a small light burned. It was not the glow of alien skin, nor the fire of machines. It was the fire of a decision, the fire of a human heart. And that fire told the world one thing clearly. He would stand between them and the blades again, and again, for as long as it took. The fields grew quiet after the machine rolled away. Only the echo of its heavy wheels remained, fading into the distance. The dust slowly settled, revealing the torn earth and the broken stalks of crops. But in the middle of the ruin, 3 figures sat breathing in ragged unison. The human leaned back against a low ridge of dirt. His chest rose and fell like a drum, sweat dripping down his face. In one arm, he held the weak alien boy, limp but alive. Beside him, the silver-skinned girl crawled close, pressing herself against his side. Her small hand trembled as she gripped his sleeve, refusing to let go. For a long time, none of them spoke. The silence was heavy but not empty. It was filled with the sound of survival. The girl's glowing eyes looked at him, filled with awe and confusion. She had never seen such defiance, such risk taken for someone like her. Her kind had always believed humans were selfish, unworthy of trust. But here was proof, carved into the earth, that at least one human thought differently. The boy stirred, coughing weakly. The human lowered him carefully, brushing dirt from his skin. He looked frail, starved of strength, abandoned like the girl had been. His chest rose in shallow breaths, but he was alive. Alive because the human had chosen to risk his life not once, but twice. The girl tried to speak, her words broken and halting. Her language carried sharp sounds and soft whispers, hard to understand. But her eyes told more than her tongue could. They shone with gratitude, fragile and bright. She leaned against the man's arm and closed her eyes, whispering something that sounded like a promise. The man stayed still, his mind racing. What had begun as a simple choice in a single moment had grown heavier. Now he was not responsible for one child, but 2. Both abandoned, both cast aside as worthless, and both now looking to him as if he were their only shield. He thought of the other workers, the ones who had turned away. None of them would help. None would share this burden. They would only whisper in fear or anger. They would call him foolish, reckless, even traitor. But he felt no regret. The weight in his arms was not a burden. It was purpose. The night grew colder, a sharp wind sweeping across the open fields. The crops swayed, broken in some places, standing tall in others. The machines were still out there, moving like giants through the darkness. But for now, the 3 of them had a small pocket of peace. The boy shifted, opening his eyes. They glowed faintly, weaker than the girl's, but still carrying the same strange light. He looked up at the man holding him, confusion plain on his face. He whispered something, perhaps his name, perhaps a question. The human shook his head gently. "I don't understand you," he said softly, "but I won't leave you." The children exchanged a look. For the first time since their abandonment, they seemed to breathe easier. Together, they leaned against him, their fragile bodies warming against his. And in that closeness, he felt their trust binding him tighter than any chain. Far away, at the edge of the field, shadows moved. Figures cloaked in dark fabric stood watching. Their eyes glinted under the dim light, sharp and cruel. They had returned, not to save, but to make sure their castaways were gone. They saw the human now, saw him protecting what they had abandoned, and their whispers carried across the wind like venom. The man noticed them, his eyes narrowing. He knew they would not be pleased with his defiance. But he did not flinch, did not shift his arms away from the children. Instead, he straightened his back, his shoulders hard with resolve. If they meant to take the children again, they would have to face him. The girl sensed it too, her eyes snapping open. She pressed closer to him, whispering in fear. The boy reached a small hand to grip the man's shirt. Their trust had grown into something deeper, dependence. They no longer looked to the distance for safety. They looked only to the human, the one who had chosen them. The night grew darker, the wind colder. But in the middle of the ruined field, a small light burned. It was not the glow of alien skin, nor the fire of machines. It was the fire of a decision, the fire of a human heart. And that fire told the world one thing clearly. He would stand between them and the blades again, and again, for as long as it took. The night carried on, cold and restless. The wind whispered through the broken fields, lifting scraps of dust and stalks into the air. The human sat with the children close at his side, his arms forming a barrier against the chill. Their glowing eyes reflected the faint light of the stars, fragile sparks of life that had refused to go out. The boy leaned against his chest, his breathing shallow but steady. The girl curled closer, her small hands holding his sleeve as though it anchored her to safety. They had called him father, a word that burned into his heart like fire. It was not his blood they carried, not his people they belonged to, but in their voices the word carried truth. They had chosen him, just as he had chosen them. He watched their faces, saw the exhaustion that dragged at their features. Their weakness was clear, but so was their strength. They had survived abandonment, fear, and the blades of the machines. They had clung to life when others wanted them erased. And now, in the curve of his arms, they were beginning to believe in hope again. The human adjusted his position, pulling his coat tighter around them. Warmth was scarce, but he gave them what he could. The girl tilted her head and whispered something soft. Her words were broken fragments, but her tone was gentle, almost questioning. The man shook his head with a small smile. "I don't understand," he said quietly, "but I hear you." The boy stirred, opening his glowing eyes. He pointed to himself, then to the girl, then pressed a hand to the man's chest. The message was clear even without words. He was linking them together, declaring something new, not abandoned, not broken, but family. The man felt the weight of it. It was not the kind of family written in blood or name. It was a bond written in choice, in action, in survival. The bond had been forged in the moment he ran into the blades to save them. And now it grew stronger, unbreakable. The children relaxed, their trust visible in the way they leaned into him. It was a small thing, but powerful. For beings who had only known rejection, trust was rebellion. And together, their rebellion was forming something greater than fear. But shadows still lingered at the edge of the field. The cloaked figures had not vanished. Their eyes still glowed faintly in the distance, sharp and cold. They spoke among themselves in hushed tones, their movements quick and harsh. The man knew they would not leave forever. They would return, perhaps with anger, perhaps with blades sharper than any harvester. Still, he did not waver. He looked at the children and felt a new strength rise in him. It was not the strength of muscle or weapon. It was the strength of bond, the strength of promise. He was no longer protecting strangers. He was defending family. The girl pressed her forehead against his chest, her voice whispering again. Though he could not understand, he heard the word safe. It was enough. The boy curled closer, his small hand clutching at the man's coat as though he feared being torn away. The human placed his rough hand over the boy's, holding it steady. "You are safe," he whispered back. The words meant little in language, but everything in feeling. Time passed, slow and heavy. The children dozed, their breathing evening out. The man stayed awake, watching the horizon. Every flicker of shadow made him tense. Every gust of wind carried threat. Yet beneath it all, he felt something calm in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt purpose larger than himself. The stars wheeled above, endless and cold. But down in the dirt, in the broken field, a small family had begun to form. Not by blood, not by law, but by choice. By the act of a human who had decided that no life should be abandoned. And by two children who had chosen to trust him when trust was hardest. This bond, fragile but real, was stronger than any blade. It was a shield no machine could cut. It was the spark of something greater, something that could one day challenge the cruelty of those who had left them behind. The human looked down at the sleeping children. His voice was a whisper, almost lost to the wind. "You are mine now," he said softly, "and I will not let them take you." The children did not stir, but their small bodies pressed closer, as if they had heard every word. And with that, the bond between them sealed tighter, a bond that would carry them into whatever dangers came next. The first light of dawn touched the fields. The sky glowed with pale fire, pushing back the night shadows. The machines still moved in the distance, their metal jaws tearing through the crops, but their sound no longer carried fear for him. The greater danger came from the horizon, from the cloaked figures who returned as the morning rose. The man stood tall, the children at his side. The girl clung to his arm, her glowing eyes sharp with fear. The boy pressed close to his leg, his hand clutching the man's coat. They had survived the night together, but now their test was greater. Their own people had come back, not with mercy, but with judgment. The cloaked figures moved like shadows, their faces hidden, their voices cut through the wind, sharp, cold, and merciless. The girl flinched at the sound, recognizing the tongue that had once spoken to her as family. The boy lowered his head, his small shoulders trembling, but the man did not move. He stepped forward, his body forming a wall between the children and those who abandoned them. The figures spread out, circling, their cloaks whispering against the dirt. Their leader raised a hand, long fingers curling like claws. The voice that came was deep and mocking. "You took what was cast away," the leader said. "You keep what is worthless." The words were poison, meant to break resolve. But the man's eyes did not falter. He raised his voice strong and steady. "They are not worthless," he said, his words clear though the children's people might not understand his language. "They are alive, and while I stand, no blade will touch them." The children looked up at him, their fear colliding with hope. The girl's grip on his arm tightened, her lips parting in awe. The boy whispered softly, "Father," as if the word itself could shield them. The leader's voice hissed, "You protect weakness. Human, you shame yourself." The others echoed in agreement, their cloaks shifting like restless snakes. But the man only stepped closer, his boots pressing deep into the soil. His body cast a shadow over the children. His voice came again, harder now, filled with steel. "If protecting them is shame, then I welcome it. If standing against you makes me enemy, then I accept it, but I will not move, not while they still breathe." The fields grew still, the air heavy. The children pressed closer, their small bodies trembling but holding on. They felt his strength, not just in his words, but in the ground beneath his feet. He was one man against many. Yet in that moment, he felt unbreakable, because he did not stand for himself. He stood for them. The cloaked figures shifted uneasily. Their whispers grew sharper, but none stepped forward. Perhaps they saw the fire in his eyes. Perhaps they sensed that his will was stronger than their cruelty. The leader lowered his hand, his glare sharp as a blade. "You will regret this," the voice promised. Then, as quickly as they came, the shadows pulled back, slipping into the horizon like smoke. Silence returned, broken only by the hum of distant machines. The man exhaled, his breath heavy, his chest burning with the weight of what had just passed. The children looked up at him, their eyes wide. The girl whispered something soft, a word he could not know, but whose meaning was clear. Her voice carried gratitude, trust, and love all at once. The boy echoed the word, and their glowing eyes shone brighter than the morning sun. The man knelt, pulling them both into his arms. His rough hands rested on their fragile shoulders, steady and strong. "You are safe," he whispered. "You are mine now." The children pressed into him, clinging not out of fear, but of belonging. And for the first time in their lives, they believed the promise. The sun rose higher, washing the fields in gold. The machines continued their endless work, but the true battle had already been fought. A human had stood before cruelty and refused to move. He had chosen compassion over indifference, courage over silence, family over fear. And in that choice, something greater was born. The bond they shared was no longer fragile. It was a shield, unbreakable, forged in fire and bloodless defiance. The girl lifted her head, her voice soft but certain. "Father," she whispered again. The boy repeated it, his voice stronger this time. The man closed his eyes, his heart steady, for he knew he would hear that word again and again for the rest of his life. And so the story of abandonment ended not with silence, but with a stand, not with blades, but with bond, a bond that proved humanity's greatest strength was not in machines or weapons, but in the courage to protect the weak, and in the refusal to walk away.